parents. What are your creepy stories involving your kids and ghosts? It's Em here. Some people have been asking for a longer video, so I hope you enjoy today's video. Story 1. Before our oldest was talking, we found that often when we lay him down in his room, either to sleep or change his nappy, he'd look over our shoulder and start smiling or chuckling, like he was reacting to someone. My wife and I independently decided that it was my dad to come look in on his first grandchild. All the other grandparents are still alive. Dad took his own life when I was 12. This went on for a couple of months or so, but we never addressed it out loud at the time. Then we'd put our boy down to sleep, and for a little while we'd hear him chuckling and gurgling for a while before he slept. Kids do that, but it really sounded like he was reacting to someone playing with him. One night he was still going an hour after we had put him down. And my wife said, "Use your dad, go talk to him." So, feeling slightly silly at first, I went in and said to the room, "Dad, please let him sleep." I told my son, "Say goodnight to Grandpa and get some sleep." As I walked out, I said, "I miss you, Dad. I love you." Here's a comment. I've never been too sure about whether I really believe in spirits, but I certainly suddenly feel warm and comforted. That was the last night that we both heard the bedtime playing. From then on, when we put our boy down, he went to sleep without a quiver and still does several years on. About 18 months later, our second child, now at roughly the same age as her brother when Dad visited, starts howling. Not long after she's gone to bed. I went and comforted her, but got a distinct feeling of confusion for a minute before it went, and then she settled down. A couple nights later, the same thing happens. I went to settle her again, but this time I said, "Dad, she can't handle this like her brother did. If you were here, she'd love you and be in your lap all the time, but not like this. She can't deal with it. Please leave her alone." That was the last visit we ever had that we're aware of, even with their 3 younger siblings. Here's a comment for after the update. Only story so far that gave me real chills. That's an awesome story, man. It's great that your dad got to spend time with his grandkids, even from the afterlife. Stories like this take the idea of an imaginary friend to a whole new level. I've read a few of these before where it's like a relative who passed away and then say that their kids are heard talking to them. Some of them seem a little silly, but then there are the ones where the kid knows things about how the person passed, or just like random facts about them that there was no way they could know if they weren't told them. Story 2. Not a parent, but stories my mother has told us about my sisters and I as kids. My parents bought a 150-year-old house when I was 3 months old, and my mom had a few odd incidents when I was a baby, like the cat freaking out at nothing, or all the kitchen cupboards all randomly being open when she walked into the room, even if no one else was home. I was a very imaginative toddler, with a bunch of imaginary friends, one being Harvey, or the old man who lived on the stairs, as I described him to my mother. Although an odd choice of friend for a 2-year-old little girl, she wasn't overly concerned, and all my friends eventually disappeared by the time I was 3.5. Well, before my younger sister's 4th birthday, a year or so later, as soon as my sister was really talking, she also began sitting on the bottom step, having full conversations with the old man who lived on the stairs. There was absolutely no overlap in our experiences, and my mother was understandably freaked out. But once again, by the time she was 3 to 4, my sister stopped talking to Harvey, right around the time our youngest sister was born. As she neared her 2nd birthday, when I was about 9, we started renovations on a previously untouched 4th bedroom to give me my own room. We tore down about 10 layers of wallpaper, down to the bare plaster walls, and found exquisite pencil drawings covering the walls, huge castles sitting on rocks with waves crashing at their feet, lighthouses and landscapes. All were signed Harvey in a flourishing script. Our baby sister never spoke to Harvey, and all odd occurrences stopped. Apparently, he only wanted his art seen. Here's a comment. This makes me very happy for some reason. He cared for you and your sis, and you got to see his art. I love these stories, kind of like the first one, where it just seems to be a friendly ghost who wants to be nice or just be recognized. I'm happy Harvey was able to get his drawings seen, and I hope that you were able to keep some of them up in your room, OP. Story 3. I am a parent, but this is not my story. It's my dad's story. When I was 5, my brother was 2, and my sister had yet to be born. We lived in a 3-bedroom, 2-bath apartment. The place was up to date for it being 2000-2001, but nonetheless it was creepy. My parents would often hear sounds, my brother or my own toys making sounds. But my parents always attributed the weird sounds, "Hey, toys," and began playing with them. My parents always look for a logical explanation. Well, it was a normal day. My dad was playing cards with my brother in front of our front door. There was linoleum here rather than carpet. They had been playing for a while when my brother looked up at the wall across from the front door. My dad explained it as my brother was playing, laughing, making car noises 1 second, and then the next, he just had a blank look and was staring at the wall. My dad, of course, asked him what's wrong, as any parent would. My little 2-year-old brother, still with the blank face on, looks at my dad and says, "The man on the wall wants you to leave. He wants to play with mommy now." After he said that, he went directly back to playing as if nothing had happened. My dad freaks the frick out, has the apartment blessed, the whole shebang. My mom attributed to a little kid's imagination until much later, when she was home alone with my brother and crazy crap happened. I have my own stories too. I may have been 5, but being in the apartment and realizing and dealing with paranormal crap pretty much just made me the "it's a ghost" person, rather than a logical person like my parents. I think reading paranormal stuff is very interesting, especially depending on your personal beliefs on it. Take my parents, for example. My mom absolutely believes in it, and anytime anything falls around the house, even though they have 3 pets, will believe it's a ghost. My dad, on the other hand, has seen stuff legit fly off shelves and felt the temperature drop like 15 degrees suddenly, and still will try to come up with a logical explanation. Story 4. Obligatory, not a parent, but mine told me this a while ago. I was around 3 years old, so I have no memory of this. I used to have those weird dolls with a plastic head and floppy bodies made of fabric. I forget the word in English. I had a twin set, one with a pink body and another with blue. And for some reason, I was drawn to the pink one, which I drew on and carried around the house. One night, my parents were walking in my room and heard me laughing inside. They got confused because I was alone and it was late. So they come into my room and I'm laughing with the doll in my hands. They asked me what I was doing, and apparently I told them I was talking to the Kamal. They then asked me what I was doing so late, and I answered it was because he didn't shut up and he was funny anyway. Creeped out but tired, they turned my lights off and told me to go to sleep, then went to their room. Apparently, I only talked to the Kamal at night, and if someone asked me if I was afraid of the dark, I would respond, "No, the Kamal protects me." I think I grew up and forgot about that, but my parents still think something was up and packed the Kamal when we moved around 6 years ago, and it is still somewhere in the attic. We never had any supernatural experiences outside the Kamal, and I wonder if it has something to do with it. Here's a comment. You need to look for the doll for answers, dude. Story 5. I had a dog from the time I was about 6 or 7 until I was about 19 or 20. My oldest son was born a few years after he died. Flash forward to when my son was around 2.5, he started telling me about the black dog that lives in the basement, where the dog, who was a black lab, died. He said something along the lines of, "I woke up when you were still working and the black dog was in our room. I asked if he meant our current dog, who was black and tan, but he was insistent it wasn't Gunoir. Sorry if I said that wrong, but the other dog. And I also didn't allow the dog in our room ever, and he never tried to come in. Also, same kid, same time frame. My best friend committed suicide days before my son's birthday. He had no recollection of Pat besides knowing he had an uncle named Pat. Well, I came home from work one morning and he was wide of the frick awake at 6 a.m. I worked overnight and he usually slept until around 9 a.m., talking in his crib. I assumed he was talking to himself. I asked him who he was talking to, and he said, "My pirate friend," and said he has a patch, and I kind of brushed it off. Then I realized, wait, Pat was blind in one eye. Pat always cosplays pirates. Pat loved him. Pat continued to visit my son for years after that. Here's a comment. Man, I hope my dog still visits me like when she passes. I love her so much. Another cute story about people visiting family from across the grave, but this time there's a dog. I might melt. It's really interesting, too, how it is mostly kids who seem to see these ghosts. Not sure why. Do you guys have any theories? Story 6. When I worked as a camp counselor, rumor had it that the campground was very haunted. The cabin me and my campers were staying in was supposed to be the most haunted. Every day the light on the porch would turn itself on and off, and I thought nothing of it, until I found out it doesn't automatically do that. We told the kids ghost stories to occupy them, but one day, around 2 p.m., I heard my girls shushing each other and then knocking. They were knocking 3 times on the floors and walls and pressing their ears to it. Because apparently, if we knock, it knocks back in the same pattern. I leave them to their BS, go outside, and find the other girls totally freaking with them by knocking back. I kept my cake hole shut because it was funny. That night around 2 a.m. when all my coworkers had gone to bed and none of the campers were up, I heard 3 knocks on the cabin siding. Guess they were right after all. Here's a comment. Look at the bright side. At least it's not your home. Story 7. My daughter used to see spirit when she was very young, and she'd be absolutely terrified. It would happen most often when I was in the bath with her, and we came to realize it was one of my Polish Mrs. female intendants, who, when she was alive, would have done all of the caring of the female child, and it would have been strange, then, for the man to be in the bath with his daughter, drying her, changing her underwear, etc. There was a particular time where she came through so strongly that, as I'm trying to dry and dress my rigid daughter, who kept looking over my shoulder and shouting, "Go away," I could actually feel a physical weight against me, pushing against my back and shoulder, and I had to keep communicating with her to get back. It was worse when my daughter was 2 or 3, but isn't any kind of issue now. Hopefully the aged Polish female spirit has noticed that nothing sinister has befallen my daughter during the hundreds of times that I've bathed, dried, and dressed her, and, mellowed a bit. Story 8. My daughter had 2 moments. As an infant, whenever we laid her on the chaining table, she would always squirm into whatever position would allow her to stare into one corner on the ceiling of the room. It was a plain white room and plain white ceiling, so nothing worth looking at. She'd always stare and smile or laugh. As she got a little older, she would point at it and say hi. We never really worried because it was always seeming to be a positive experience for her. Not a ghost, but just an eerie. When she was 3, we were getting her ready to meet my Aunt Mary for the first time. We are not a church-going family, but she proudly told us that she already knows someone named Mary. We ask about her friend Mary, and she smiles and tells us she's God's mom, and tells how she hasn't talked to her in a long time. Of course, she doesn't remember any of these conversations anymore, but they are burned in my memory. Very strange, especially if the child never learned about the thought that Jesus' mom was named Mary. Maybe she heard it somewhere before, but it's still a little weird. Story 9. My kid's been fairly boring ghost-wise, but a coworker had a really interesting story. He has 3 kids. When the oldest was a baby, he used to sometimes point at nothing and cry. As he got older, he'd say, "Doggy, doggy." There was no doggy and the parents were like, overactive imagination? By the age of 3 or so, it had stopped, and the kid and parents seemed to forget all about it. Second kid was born, and nothing out of the ordinary. Third kid was born, and as a baby toddler would point at nothing and cry, "Doggy, doggy." That freaked him out. He said they went and asked a priest to perform an exorcism, and after that, the baby stopped talking about dogs. Here's a comment. Wait a minute, they performed an exorcism on the baby because he said "doggy, doggy"? WTF? Story 10. Not my kid, but my boyfriend's brother. My boyfriend's parents tell me stories about their previous house, where every night the brother would wake up terrified, claiming there was a little old man holding a lantern in his room. At first, they just thought he'd seen something on TV, but they called in their friend who was a pastor just to ask him if he could take a look. They never gave details. He brought a woman, a medium, along with him, and sure enough, she went around the house and stopped in his room. She stated that there was a man in there, about 4 feet, holding a lantern in the corner of the room. Again, she had no idea about this. Cleansed it, and the brother never said anything about them again. Too long didn't read. The boyfriend's brother claimed a small man was in his room. Medium, unaware of the situation, and stated the exact same thing. Story 11. Not a parent, but a friend of mine had 2 incidents. For a little while, his younger daughter of about 4 would totter around their newly bought house with one hand in the air. When he asked what she was up to, she replied, "I'm holding the lady's hand." The house was reportedly haunted by an elderly woman who loves small children. Later, his 2 daughters who were playing with a Super Ball one night when it rolled under the stove. They couldn't see it or find it, so they decided to move the stove. The next day, it was about their bedtime anyway, so they took the opportunity to put them to bed. Next morning, the Super Ball was sitting on the top of the stove. Nobody took credit for getting it out. Here's a comment. That seems like a nice ghost. Try to talk to her. Okay, I highly disagree with this idea that people should try to talk to ghosts, even if they're nice. Maybe this is me being a pessimist, but I'm always scared the spirit might get too attached to a kid and end up hurting the parents. I think that's just because I've watched too many horror movies. Story 12. My 4-year-old daughter started not being able to sleep. She was complaining that Simon was coming to her room and yelling at her. It got to the point where she wouldn't let us leave the room until we told him to go away and leave her alone. My Catholic mom-in-law was getting worried and gave me a bag of blessed medals while I was at Walmart and saw her. I rolled my eyes and threw them in a drawer when I got home, instead of burying them and saying prayers like she wanted. My daughter stopped seeing Simon the same night. She had no idea about the medals, wasn't with me at Walmart, and I put them in the drawer before she got home. So it creeped me out. Here's the comment. Simon says, "Take those medals away, you little crap. This is my room." Story 13. My youngest son named his favorite toy, stuffed dinosaur plushie, after my dead sister. I've never spoken her name out loud before to him or around him. I've never brought him to a grave. He'd never know this name otherwise. It's a European name my parents gave my sister because it sounded pretty. One day, he took a small plastic gun from one of his many army guys and put it in the hand of another toy and chased the dino around, manically saying, "Boom, boom, boom, you're so dead and your baby is too." My sister was 6 months pregnant when her boyfriend killed her. Her unborn died as well. He laughs at this toy a lot, like too much for it just being a game. He talks to it all the time as if he's responding to him in real time. Story 14. My little cousin was blonde with huge big eyes, just like a young Dakota Fanning. But dang, she said some creepy things. She told my aunt once that there was a man without a head in the bush while they were walking. She was 4 or 5. She also used to play with her imaginary friend Lena, who had blonde hair. Apparently, Lena died because she was sick to her tummy. All well and good. But her grandma on her dad's side died of stomach cancer. She had yellow hair. Pleased to meet you. Hoped you guessed her name. Lena. That little blue-eyed blonde-haired angel had me convinced she had the sight. No sign of it once she hit 10. Honestly, if you had told me this kid's name was Luna Lovegood, I would have believed you. Maybe you should have tried to get her to tell you the next winning lottery numbers. Story 15. My kid had sliding mirror doors in her closet. She goes to bed early, but I check on her now and then. One night, I was on my way to bed, and I heard weird chanting sounds from her room. I opened the door to check on her, and she's standing on the bed staring in the mirror. She looks at me and says, "Mirror me is the real me." I closed the door and nope right out of there. The next morning, I asked her about what she was doing. She said, "I was talking to horrifying me. She lives in the mirror and has no bones. My husband's family is haunted, so I guess it was just a matter of time. But frick that, kids are so creepy." Story 16. Not a parent, but my mom and I both see a figure in white when something impactful is going to happen in our lives, either positive or negative. When my parents separated, a person in a black cloak stood at the end of her bed, with his hands facing upward, similar to holy images of Mary, for example. But just before they got back together, a figure in white visited her and said change is on the way. My visits haven't been as communicative, but I've seen the large white figure walk by me, and something has always happened in the coming days. I have dreams of my guardian angel, and like to believe it's him. To me, it would actually be really nice to know that as soon as I see the white figure, that something good was going to happen soon. If it is just a visual hallucination, I'm sure it must brighten your mood at least a little. Story 17. I don't have any kids, but my sister did this when we were little. My cousin was babysitting us, like when we were only 2 and 3, and one night, a couple weeks after my great-grandpa died, my sister was in the living room running all across the room, just laughing and staring at the ceiling. When my cousin asked what she was doing, she said she was playing with great-grandpa. Around the same time, my other cousin, who was 2 at the time of his death, ran up to my uncle, his dad, and hugged him. My uncle asked why he hugged him randomly, and my cousin said that grandpa told me to and that he loves you. Story 18. Not the parent, but the child. When I was a small child, I was playing in the living room while my mom was watching Dr. Phil. And it was an episode about children seeing their dead grandparents. And me, being the little crap I was, realized it would let me get out of trouble. So from that point on, for a few weeks or so, whenever I would break something or do something I wasn't supposed to, and my mom asked, "Why did you do that?" I would respond, "Papa told it to me." And she would take me to the wall of family pictures, and I would point to her dad who died before I was born. I was not a great child. Well, I might take back everything I've said about these last couple of stories. That being said, most of these other stories didn't have the child acting out, compared to this one, who honestly is brilliant but extremely manipulative. I know if I had tried this, my dad would still whoop me. Story 19. My 13-month-old goes into the kitchen 3 to 4 times a day and just stares up at the far corner of the ceiling. At first, I thought nothing of it, and then she starts laughing at nothing and doesn't acknowledge me when I call her over or speak to her. I put it down to her being young and random, but really it's quite odd that it's always that corner and multiple times a day. Creeps, but not creeps enough to move. Here's a comment. My toddler stares at the ceiling and giggles everywhere. She just finds ceilings interesting, particularly at stores, and tipping her head back makes her dizzy. Story 20. At our former house, I used to see arcs of light frequently. I've read somewhere that some of these people believe these are spirits. I've also read that it can be the result of dust in the air, so who knows? Anyway, when my son was a toddler, I saw an arc of light go from the room we were in into the bathroom. It turns out that my son saw it too, because in a creeped-out voice he said, "Who's that?" And he knew the difference between who and what. He seemed really creeped out. I just kept it cool and said something like, "It's nothing," or something to that effect. Since moving from that house, I haven't seen arcs of light anymore. I know people who think that orbs in pictures are ghosts, but this is honestly one that doesn't really convince me, mainly because my old house was dusty as hell. and there would always be little dust particles in pictures that looked like those little orbs. Story 21. Last night, me and my partner both heard a sound like yoo-hoo, as in someone talking to a baby. Our 17-month daughter started giggling like I've never heard and babbling away like she always does when she's talking. This isn't the first instance of something odd happening in our house, but it sent goosebumps all over me. Here's a comment. Could be an angel protecting your daughter. I'd go check with a medium. If it's friendly, keep her or him around the house, because he or she could be protecting your daughter. Story 22. My 3-year-old daughter asked, how did your sister die? My parents' first child died at 2 weeks due to complications. She was born the day before my mom's birthday, and neither parent ever talked about her because it was too painful. There is no way my daughter could have ever overheard that. Not only I had a sister, but that she died as well. A month later, my daughter tells me, Mommy's gonna give me a baby brother in the spring. Wife and I found out we were pregnant 2 weeks later. We had a son in March. This is either a psychic child or maybe some spirit was telling your daughter about her family. Story 23. My father bought a Native American medicine bag while he was in the Western U.S. He brought it back and gave it to my son, who was 2 or 3 at the time. We took it home and hung it on the doorknob of my son's closet. Soon afterward, my son started complaining of not being able to sleep because the bell in the bag would start ringing. Then these spoonbills would start coming out of the closet. He didn't seem particularly bothered by the spoonbills, but just irritated that they made the bell ring. Story 24. A friend of mine has 2 kids that never met their great-grandfather. He passed away before they were born. They would hear the kids laughing and playing in their room and ask what they were doing. They said, playing with Bop Bop. That was the nickname he had from his grandkids. Here's a comment. Oh wow, that's what one of my grandfathers was called, and I've literally never heard another person use that term for granddad. Story 25. When my youngest son started speaking, the wife had a friend with a newborn. My son was constantly telling us what the friend's baby was saying and wanted, and he spoke to the baby more than anyone. The theory is that he was still on the cusp of being able to communicate with babies and adults. But it tripped us out for like 2 months until the baby started talking to babble. After that, the kid didn't understand what the baby was saying and would just tell us he's upset. This makes me wonder if there maybe is some super secret baby language that actually exists, with like certain noises making complete sense to other babies. If so, do you think there's any way we would ever be able to understand it? Kind of like how people have been trying to understand dogs barking and how they're able to communicate so effectively. Story 26. We took my 3-year-old daughter to meet my wife's grandmother who lived on the other side of the county. We walk in the house and my daughter doesn't even look at her great-grandmother, but instead goes straight over to a picture of her great-great-grandmother, points at it and says, "That's the lady who lives in my room. She's nice." Here's a comment explaining what we're all thinking. This gave me chills. Story 27. I was convinced that there was an invisible walrus in my room aged 2 to 5. I wouldn't go in there unless I was forced to, and I'd be screaming about the walrus the whole time. Once I settled down though, the walrus would disappear. I went through this walrus routine every day. Went back to my childhood bedroom years later and was sure I could feel a walrus's presence. Spooked the heck out of me. Story 28. My father died when my daughter was 1. He had liver failure, collapsed, and fell in the bathtub. I found him 3 days later. We never told our daughter this, just that he passed away. She's 3 years old now. Today during dinner, she said, "Granddad loves yellow and white flowers. He does not like red ones. He told me so. Granddad fell in the water and died." It freaked me the heck out. This freaked me out too. Maybe the flowers was a lucky guess, but it's strange how the granddaughter would know how her papa died even if nobody had ever told her. Story 29. Babysat these 2 boys a lot. Never said anything about ghosts or the like until they moved. Once they did, all they would ask about was "my friend in the room is hungry," or "my friend is mad now." I asked them to show me where their friend was, and as I entered the room, the house lost power. WTF. Somebody commented, "Oh heck no, I would be crapping bricks." Story 30. My daughter was refusing to fall asleep, so after a while I asked her why she wouldn't, and she said, "Because those people are watching us," or something similar, and pointed to a corner of the room where there wasn't anything even vaguely human-shaped. We slept downstairs that night. And somebody commented, "I would too, lol." Story 31. My mom says I used to have conversations with my grandfather that I never met, and he'd tell me life stories and stuff about fishing, all of which were true, and it wigged my mom out. I also asked if she remembered when she was the daughter and I was the mommy, on the way to school one day. Apparently, I lived in Paris in a past life. Maybe this was just a child's overactive imagination. Or maybe OP was actually remembering past lives. It'd be cool if someone tracked and wrote down everything OP had said. Maybe they could make a movie about it or something. I would watch that. Story 32. I went into my 3-year-old son's room to find his vent covered with a blanket. I went to take it off and he started screaming and yelling that the glowy would escape. The next morning, I found him sleeping on my bedroom floor because I let the glowy out. Somebody commented, "You fool. You've unleashed the glowy." Story 33. Not my story, it's about my aunt's daughter. When they first moved into their house, the daughter pointed to the ceiling and said, "Mommy, why is the person sitting there not in the chair?" I got chills when my aunt was telling me this. Somebody commented, "That's it for me. Time to head over to the eye bleach." Story 34. I shared this before, but when I was a toddler, my parents came into my room and saw I was giggling in my crib. They asked why I was giggling, to which I replied, "I'm playing hide and seek with Grandpa Martin, who had died before my birth." They then asked, "Are you having fun?" And I said, "Not so much." Yeah, I get that. Hard to win hide and seek if you can't leave the crib. I wouldn't have fun if I was always losing. Story 35. My niece will just stare at nothing suddenly across the living room and smile. And it's her very specific, "Hi, I'm 2. I love everybody I see" smile. We joke that it's a ghost, but it's just creepy. Somebody commented, "Maybe she's just practicing." Story 36. Last night I was reading my son a book before bed. He's 15 months old. I read one part and tickled him, and he said hi and waved towards his crib. At that moment, the mobile started playing music. Somebody commented, "Get out now." Story 37. According to my parents, when I was about 2, I started going under the stairs in the basement to talk to the little girl. I would sit down there for hours just talking and laughing. Sometimes would even sleep down there. And someone commented, "Frick that." See, if OP had said they were talking to the little boy, I would have assumed they were talking to Harry Potter. Although, that was my second reference in one video. Is it obvious I want to reread the book soon? Story 38. I was the kid in this situation. I'm a triplet. When we were babies, apparently every once in a while we would drop everything we were doing, look up and laugh, or move our heads around as if we were watching something. Then we would all stop and act like nothing happened. Story 39. My little sister once had an imaginary friend who didn't. Reportedly, this friend is described as not having a face. My mom asked her where the friend lived, and my sister said, "Mommy, she's not alive." Story 40. My niece started waving and talking to the wall behind me while I was caring for her. She'd even stop in the middle of screaming to smile at whatever she was seeing, or hopefully imagining. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.